It might seem hard to believe because of how popular the show is and how long it's lasted, but it's actually been 10 years to the day since Betty first made her appearance in Adventure Time. Now, as you guys might know, the Betty brain rot has hit me pretty hard over this past year or so. There's been a lot of conversation I've had talking about this character because I find her really fascinating. In honor of this sort of momentous occasion, I might as well make a compilation sort of thing of all the videos I've done talking about her and what I think makes her so cool. Obviously, you can put this on whether you're working on something, drawing, playing a game. You know how it is. We all love those long, kind of rambly videos that just hit every time you listen. I've never really done one of these before, so hopefully you enjoy. Betty is a character that I genuinely couldn't see myself falling this deep into the rabbit hole with. She's nowhere near as fleshed out as Simon or Marcy, Finn, PB, but with Betty appearing so late in the game and so infrequently, it's actually kind of insane how invested I am in her as a character, and I think a lot of it has to do with what this show is going to go for in the final 2 episodes. Betty, intrinsically, has always been attached to Simon. Whether she's the second name on the book, whether she's the passenger and he's the driver, Betty has always been at the hip with this character. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to say their relationship was toxic or anything like that, but Betty giving up on her dream to have her new dream of being with Simon clearly is not the best thing ever, with Fiona literally saying, "Oh, so you went on the bus with her?" instead of her going with him. The entire series has been Betty constantly trying to save Simon, to do everything for Simon. If she is stuck with Ice King, who is she? Because Ice King isn't Simon. As much as she wants to try and make it so in her mind, Ice King isn't Simon. Even though Betty tried to be with Ice King, she knew she couldn't. She would have just gone completely crazy. Because Betty is so tied to Simon intrinsically, she literally can't see herself being anyone or anything without him. I think that's a genuinely incredibly tragic thing that a lot of people go through. When you're in a relationship, it makes you feel so complete and full and whole, like that missing half that so many people have talked about. But when you're out of it, it makes you feel like complete garbage, because that relationship in turn becomes a part of who you are. Without that sort of compatibility, there's just emptiness. GOLB is this being that is shrouded in darkness, and Betty is unraveling further and further and further into being something that is incomparable to who she was originally. But what makes it really sad is the fact that Betty actually knows that this is happening. It's not like some Ice King situation. Betty can easily see that she's going crazy, and she's like, I'm trying to get better, but I don't think that's possible. I wanted to talk about why I think it's very, very intriguing that Simon is now seemingly taking up the role of what Betty was in the original series. After Betty, who literally, when she could have had anything in the whole world, she had Simon back, her goal was accomplished, the only line she could muster was, I'm sorry I messed everything up. That's all she could think about. I'm sorry I messed up. I literally saved your life, and I messed up. All Betty wanted was for him to be okay, and without her, he has no purpose. He has nothing. He is exactly what Betty was, but eventually she starts spiraling uncontrollably, and Simon is clearly doing the same thing in this entire miniseries. At the end of the series, Betty was finally able to do what she wanted to do, which was to keep Simon safe, and I find that incredibly morbid. It just is this perpetual cycle of torment for these two. Like, it's so bad. It's so bad. We just got a lot of their flashback in the last episode of Fionna and Cake, which was honestly absolutely precious. It literally felt like a star-crossed lovers type thing. They were always meant to be together. But knowing that everything started sort of going left a bit in Betty's mind is really crazy to think about to me. It was such a beautiful, happy scene. The fireflies getting out of the bushes, the cute song that they started playing, which was also very sad, obviously, of course it was. It was really, really great. But now all I can think about when I see that scene is like, oh, it all started here, and it all started here at the exact same time. And for the final 2 episodes, I cannot wait to see what this is gonna fully pan out to. Hopefully, you know, Betty can actually talk and actually speak to Simon and say stuff along the lines of, I literally sacrificed my whole life, everything, for you. And it's not even in a figurative way, like sacrificed her life. She literally sacrificed her life, and yet the only person who is endangering him is himself. Super messed up. It's crazy that they're actually going with this. Like, he's spiraling so far, he's like, oh, let me just turn into that insane person again that caused all of this. I'm hoping that Betty finally gets that moment of determination to be like, no, I'm doing this, we're doing it my way. I think that would be really, really great, because Betty obviously has the power to do whatever she wants now. She is literally like one of the strongest things in the entire universe, and I highly doubt that Simon is just gonna pull Betty away and save Betty, because this is what Betty wanted. And Simon constantly throughout this series has been depicted as not really letting her do what she wanted. I think he's gonna let her stay, and it's gonna be super sad. The real question is he gonna stay with her? Is he gonna go on the bus with her? It's very fitting, since Betty's first ever actual very important episode, which was self-titled obviously, had Simon meet death, and then Simon say, I'm going on the death bus. Is Simon gonna just die? Is Simon gonna die somehow and end up being with Betty? I can easily see that happening. It'd be super sad, but hey, maybe that's what he wants, to be with her and to finally, you know, see that, oh, maybe I was holding her back a bit, and be with her and let her do what she wants. But at the exact same time, if he dies, then she can't keep him safe, and then the whole point is ruined again. So it's hard. And another different thing you could do as well is the connection between the Lich and GOLB. Now, the Lich, as we know, last scholar of GOLB, you've heard me spiel about this forever, and in this scenario, Simon is now the last scholar of GOLB. So the Lich and Simon are both in a very similar mindset. I talked about this in my last video, but I find it very interesting that GOLB and Betty are seemingly like the beings of power, the objects of desire. If we get some kind of parallel sort of backstory between the Lich and GOLB that might actually even be a parallel to Simon and Betty, that would be crazy. One of the major themes of this series is accepting how things are, living with them, and being able to grow now that you've accepted that things might not always go your way. Fionna obviously didn't really like anything about the world she was in, but now that she's seen so many horrible, horrible things, she's like, no, I kind of liked it. And Cake, even though she has grown, she's grown in a different way, where it's like, no, I like who I am now, and I didn't like who I was before. And Simon obviously is going to have to learn to live with the fact that Betty and him probably, I'm going to put a huge probably, are not going to have a happy ending. I think what they're going to get is some closure, and then he'll be able to move on and live with his life as he is now. Probably with Marceline, Finn, Prince Bubblegum, like the friends he's made like throughout these years and years. He'll finally be able to live with himself and move on from Betty. Betty has had a chaotic wellspring of stuff happen to her ever since she entered Ooh, so it's very fitting that in order to save all of Ooh, she had to become one with the chaos, literally, and accept who she has become. And I think that's really cool, because Simon obviously is going to have to accept that she is this now, and no longer the Betty he knew, because of all the experiences she's had. And I think that's a really cool parallel to him being Ice King, and now her being GOLB. Very satisfying to me. And it makes it feel as though it's a very full circle moment for all these characters involved, and it finally puts a nice little ribbon on the tragedy of Simon and Betty's romance. I think with this sort of finality, closure, and everything, Simon can finally move on to realize how important he really is to a lot of other people besides Betty. Not only did Betty accept the tragedy of the situation, but Simon did as well, and now they could both move on and live their lives, just like Betty was originally going to do, but she wanted to go explore those petroglyphs in Australia. She'll finally be able to fulfill her independent nature from Simon, and they'll both be able to do whatever they want to do. At the end of the day, you are you, and other people obviously, and other experiences you have, affect who you are. She is one of the shining stars of Adventure Time and what makes this show so real, grounded, and tragic. What do you guys think they're going to do with Betty's character? Are we going to see flashbacks from her point of view more? I think that would be really great. We obviously saw the one on Temple of Mars where she had this sort of realization, like, how much of me is there which is obviously super sad. And I know I said in the last video that, oh, I could do the love, loss, growth thing, but then I had this Betty idea and I was like, oh, this is great. And I'm gonna save that growth idea until the series is ended. And the people I want to talk about when it comes to growth are characters like Fionna, who was really a non-character in my opinion, but now I'm like, Fionna is incredibly compelling. Like, as an actual protagonist, as a lead, I actually care about her. A lot of the Fionna and Cake characters who have actually become real characters, and characters like probably Simon I'll talk about as well, because who doesn't like talking about Simon? So a lot of the stuff in the finale with Betty and Simon I thought was like masterpiece level stuff, like chef's kiss, like this is exactly what I wanted. But the main thing I wanted to discuss in this video is the scene with Betty and Simon at the bus stop, because that was a huge thing that I was hoping for and actually happened in the series. So I wanted to talk about that and a lot of the symbolism present in that scene, because I just thought generally it was pretty awesome. A lot of the stuff built up to in that scene and the scenes following, with Simon finally returning to Ooh and the butterfly landing on his face, I think have a lot of stuff that leads into what I wanted with the ending of their relationship. A lot of closure and a lot of satisfying things. There's still the possibility of us maybe, again, I'm going to put a huge fingers crossed here, maybe getting a season 2, which has me very excited. I think a lot of these things can be further developed upon through this. So I'm really genuinely excited to see if any of these things sort of get further elaborated on. So let's immediately hop into Simon being sort of transported into Shermie's body. And now there's a lot here immediately. Shermie is a reincarnation of Finn. Finn, his first ever life, was a butterfly as well. Betty, who's like this chaos deity at this point, constantly uses butterflies as some sort of imagery of her being present in the story. We even see that butterfly sort of gain her own sort of distinct facial features, with her glasses being the top wings and a smile being the bottom. I definitely think there's something here, but I also think the connection to her being the butterfly and Finn and the Catalyst Comet being a butterfly is essential to what I think is going to be present for her character going forward. There's also the concept of the butterfly effect, which is obviously how a small thing can lead to bigger changes as it goes further and further down the line, and I think that's very emblematic of Betty's character. We also kind of get some of that with the Casper and Nova book, where if you keep going on one specific path, you might not be able to do things you expected later on, like saving Betty. And I'm planning on talking about this more, like for sure. I just think this stuff is awesome, and the idea of the butterfly effect being present in shows, whether it is the main plot or character arcs, is just a really cool concept to me. So I definitely want to talk about that more in the future. After we saw him literally turn into Shermie, which is just still completely insane, we have this sort of recollection of their scene at the bus stop. Now, this scene was amazing. I loved the way that Simon not only went along with her on the bus, which I wanted the whole time, but also when he finally got to the top of the stairs, they were on equal footing, actively trying to ensure that she sees that they're equals. I love it, because Betty is a very self-sacrificial character who doesn't view herself as important as Simon in the grand scheme, and seeing him lift her up to ensure that she feels like she matters was great. They do try to get on the bus, obviously, and then they play out the whole sadness, like of course that's not gonna happen. Now Betty, she says that Simon was a wonderful experience, which sounds a bit distant and inhuman to a lot of people. However, I think it's just genuinely because she is now literally turned into this god figure, that she's viewing her own life as something that is very distant from her. She literally was able to send Simon to the future, so clearly she has some sort of time-based abilities where she could probably view the world in completely different ways than she has before, which I think is great, obviously, because it shows how much she's changed, just to show how much Simon has changed from being normal Simon to Ice King to Simon we know now. I think it's a really cool parallel between the two, and we see that really cemented when Betty is not Betty anymore. She's GOLB Betty on the bus instead of Betty. That I thought was absolutely awesome. And Simon, of course, since he has that humanity in him still, says that she was everything to him, which is pain. I love it. The thing that I thought was really interesting, now I'm going to be completely genuine right here, I don't know if this is 100% true, but I've seen speculation that the bus, as it changes to a different sort of characters, where the airport originally was, actually is some sort of code from the Enchiridion book, is actually translated to comet? Please let me know down below, because I find this idea like really fascinating, and I want to know if this has any real merit to it, because I think this idea is genuinely fascinating. Now, I think this is really crazy because of some of the stuff I said earlier about the butterfly effect stuff. With Finn, who is a catalyst comet, being represented by a blue butterfly, and Betty also being represented by a blue butterfly, I think there might be some sort of thing going here. Especially if GOLB was the person who sort of instilled the catalyst comets into existence. That would be really interesting. Betty is sort of giving up her life to be rebirthed as a catalyst comet, which is not only great for her character growth, that she is confirmed moving on and actually trying to make a life for herself outside of Simon, which is great. I know a lot of people are going to think that's kind of sad and like she's giving up on her love for Simon, but I genuinely don't think that she'll ever give up on her love for Simon, because that's just how people are. People can love each other and not be together. That's just life. Like, that is just how it is. And Betty moving on to do her own thing, like she always wanted to do, I think would be very powerful. And not only that, she would be kind of unattached from all the sort of negative thoughts that have been gnawing at her brain ever since she went into the future to be with Simon, and she would have a fresh start. Again, this is not to say she's going to stop loving Simon, because she obviously does forever. And she will be able to tap into her past lives like many other characters in the series, especially Finn, again, who also was a catalyst comet. So this idea I just think is genuinely really, really cool. And we also see, as Simon is sort of pushed away to Ooh, that GOLB is shape-shifting and turning into like this weird bluish body shape. It looks completely different from the normal GOLB, and the limbs actually look very thin, similar to how humans look in Adventure Time. I think that is further reinstating the idea that Betty is sort of moving on and changing, which I think is cool, obviously, because she wants Simon to move on, as we saw with the bus scene. And I think what makes it absolutely amazing, as Simon returns to Ooh, the first thing that happens to him is that the butterfly, which again is emblematic of Betty, lands right on his mouth, almost like a kiss. And I thought that was so beautiful. The closure between Betty and Simon was absolutely phenomenal. I know a lot of people wanted Betty to get saved and Betty to be with Simon in some sense. However, I feel as though that wouldn't actually be a great way of representing their relationship as a whole. I feel as though a lot of the greatness of the relationship is the sort of tragedy that they're never going to truly be able to be together because of some unforeseen circumstances, whether it be the crown or whether it be GOLB or whether it be the end of the world, literally. Now that they're themselves, finally, they're able to be happy, love what they had with one another, and move on. They'd be able to live their lives for themselves and not for this sort of clinginess and desperation of wanting to be with someone so badly. I do wish that Simon got a moment where he was at least hanging out with Marceline, because I do feel like that was the only other character, besides Betty obviously, that has as much weight to Simon. Now, do I want Simon to like baggage dump all his stuff onto Marceline? Of course not. Him getting therapy with Minerva, love that to death. We'd love to see Simon bettering himself. But I would have liked to see with him hanging out with Marceline, Finn, maybe Princess Bubblegum as well, but Marceline especially. Let me know down below what you all thought of the finale and the scenes with Simon and Betty. Again, this isn't everything. I do want to get into some of Simon's complete baggage in a later video, because I thought that stuff was masterclass, you know what I mean? If you told me a few years ago that I'd start making Adventure Time videos and that Betty of all characters would be the one that I have now made multiple solo videos on, I would have thought you were crazy, but this is where we are right now. We're somehow on Adventure Time grind mode, the brain rot's real, and the Betty brain rot is very real. Something that I found really interesting ever since the finale of Fionna and Cake is that there's been a little bit of a divisive take on what exactly it is about Betty's character that sort of inspired her to send Simon into Shermie's body. A lot of people took offense to this and thought that it was very self-centered of Betty, stripping him of his identity and who he is and all the people he knew to send him into the future was uncalled for. While I can understand that, a lot of people have started calling her very petty and self-centered because of this, and personally I don't agree with that at all. I think that is actually really, really crazy, because Betty, in my opinion, is like the complete opposite. Because she wanted to ensure that he was alive still, she had to do some drastic measures using the abilities that she was only given because she sacrificed herself. Betty be considered petty is ridiculous. It is incredibly antithetical to what her character actually is as a whole, being someone who sacrificed everything for Simon. And we get that strictly shown to us multiple times throughout Fionna and Cake in a very blunt and realistic way, in my opinion. Petty is honestly one of the last words I would use to describe Betty as a character. She is, in my opinion, very smart, courageous, and most importantly, devoted. You know, she's an incredibly loving partner who only wants Simon's safety and to be with Simon more than anything in the world. Now, that obviously says a lot about like her self-worth, which we're not going to get into right now, but it goes to show that she puts him on a pretty high pedestal and is the thing that she lives for. As sad as that might seem to some people, it's true. And a lot of people obviously really found that amazing about her. She was so devoted. She was willing to do anything off rip in this new world she had no idea about to save Simon. And that shows a lot of dedication. Even when Simon is reverted to Ice King, her entire motivation in the story is to save Simon, inadvertently causing herself to go insane through this dilemma. The hero is very devoted to their goal. They achieve their goal, but they themselves have to have a massive sense of tragedy at the end of the day, which I think is honestly kind of hilarious since these two are from the past where those stories were very commonplace. It makes sense that they would fall into this type of story themselves. There's obviously the other parallel of the idea of the witch being the person who causes the hero to fall into that sense of tragedy. Betty looks like a witch and uses Maja, the Sky Witch, to get into this scenario. I just think that's a really cool thing as well. I just wanted to throw that in. While devoted is what I would consider a great word to describe Betty, I'd say the most accurate word is impulsive, because Betty is an incredibly impulsive character, willing to do pretty much anything to ensure she's able to keep Simon safe. Is that entirely a good thing? Of course it's not, because it's making her seem as though she is subservient and a tool that's only used to ensure he is safe and that he gets what he wants, because she sees something in him that no one else does. And I think that sense of validation that he gets what he wants is sort of reciprocated as her getting what she wants, which is to be with him. She finds her purpose in the world through him finding his. And I think that's a very beautiful pairing between the two, and I love it a lot. But I think the impulsive nature is really interesting because it makes a lot of sense why she eventually would turn into GOLB. GOLB is obviously meant to be this entity of pure chaos, unachievable, unattainable, and unable to be communicated with, as we see with the Lich and GOLB. She became GOLB because she wanted to save him, and eventually with Simon becoming the one who's devoted to finding her. Very interesting mirror imagery. Now, Betty's wish obviously was to ensure that Simon was safe, and that's what caused her to fuse into GOLB. Now, we don't entirely know how in there Betty actually is, or if Betty is even Betty anymore and they're not just some sort of new entity being GOLB Betty. When Simon eventually meets Betty and talks to her again, he only considers her Betty the entire time, without realizing that she has changed an extreme amount. We see that Betty is still depicted as a goddess at the start of the story, but at the end, it's GOLB Betty, because it shows that he has moved on and views her as something different and is able to let go of that past image of her and move on with his life as well. And this is only possible because of what Betty was able to do by sending him into the future, by having him realize the real ramifications of what they did in their relationship. She allowed him to get some closure and move on. And I would say, even though a lot of people consider this petty, I think she's doing this for him still, because Simon clearly is incredibly devoted to her as well. They are star-crossed lovers, willing to do anything for each other. So it makes a lot of sense that he would be equally as devoted to saving her, because he finds his purpose in her, just like she did with him. Being sent to the future, reading the Casper Nova book, and getting a sort of reality check on what their relationship was is very telling. And I think it's very, very cool that he kind of got babied down. And I think it's kind of hilarious because Simon's like in his 50s. He still had to be babied down and told, like, look, your relationship was like this. You might not realize it, but this is what it was. And eventually he realizes that he has self-worth and he has a reason to live on instead of just focusing on other people. And I think that's really great because it parallels Betty's journey as well. She focused so much on Simon that she let go of herself. And Simon was doing the same thing. He was falling into that same sort of pit that he was in. With GOLB being this sort of dimension beyond all dimensions, I highly doubt time would pass at all for Simon, meaning he'd be able to just stay there until he has that wake-up call. And sure, that could have been pretty bad, let's be serious. He could have been, separated from all his friends and loved ones, but at that point, he still would have had that sense of guilt and sadness within him. Betty basically gave him a infinitely long amount of time to think about who he is as a person and realize how much he meant to her. And I wouldn't consider that petty at all. I'd say that's a genuinely great moment that shows how much she cares about him. And we see that at the bus stop scene. When he tries to do what she wants, it clearly isn't going to pan out that way because that's not how the past went. But then Betty says a really great line, "But I don't have a single regret." And I think that's a really amazing line because it shows, even though people could interpret it as Betty being petty, like, oh, I didn't get what I wanted. No, Betty did get what she wanted. She was able to be with Simon. She was able to live a happy life. She was able to save him and do what she wanted with a smile on her face after turning into this insane god monster. I definitely think there's nothing petty about this. I think this is the ultimate showing of love and sacrifice in the whole series. Let me know what you think of Betty down below, because this character has given me some crazy brain rot, I'm gonna be honest. I think I'm so invested in this character right now because there's already been so many moments with a lot of these other characters that we've seen for years and years and years, but Betty is finally getting her moment in the spotlight. I've always considered her an S tier, but now she's like really cooking with gas after Fionna and Cake, so I can't wait to see if the writers do anything more with their character. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think they really need to. I think they really hit the mark on the head and just like straight into the I don't know, sports analogy isn't my thing. Basically, they killed it with this one. Her character arc had an amazing finale. She was great basically the second she entered the show, and I personally think she marked like a specific new era of the show. She's one of those. She's one of those characters. Before I end this video, I just want to give a super genuine shout out to one of my friends, Ruby. They saw my Prismo video that I released not that long ago. I got really inspired and decided to make this fan comic sort of thing. I obviously gave it a read at this point, and it was super great. The art is obviously incredible, as you can see right here, and I'm not going to show you much of it because I don't want to ruin the emotional damage it'll give you, but I'd highly recommend you give it a read. All the links will be in the description below, and if I can, they're in that card right there in the corner. Ever since Fionna and Cake has been confirmed to get a season 2, lots of the episodes of season 1's storyboards have been starting to be released to the public. And while every episode is not out yet, and we're probably going to get more and more, I feel as though that these little storyboard sections that we got for the episode Jerry were something that I felt was really, really great, and I wanted to talk about it. This episode was personally one of my favorites of the entire series as a whole. It had so many great moments, and these storyboards actually allude to the idea of this being even greater than it already was, and bringing the series more full circle than ever. So I wanted to talk about it, gush about it, because guess what? Sure, there's a lot of baggage, but there's also some shipping, and we love that. Storyboards are a great way to tell what are in the writers' minds as they're making the season, and can foreshadow a lot of stuff that could come in the next season. So I want to take a look at this, get into some of the stuff that could be developed upon further, since we probably are going to follow Simon in the next season as well. So hopefully you enjoy this. If you do enjoy this, consider subbing, supporting the channel. You guys know what's up. From all the research I was able to do, all of these storyboards were done by Jackie Files. I'm going to leave a link to them in the description below if you want to see these sets of storyboards, because not only is it just this, there's a lot of other ones out there. So I'd recommend looking into them and brain rotting yourself more if that's what you want. So I'm going to start with this section right here in the storyboard section 2. And we get this great scene that we all know very well of Simon and Fionna staring at this campfire. And we see a bunch of fun little stuff here. The fact it's blah, and then in the universe obviously being different, they change it to mleh. A lot of fun stuff here. Now the first section I wanted to talk about is this one in section 2, where we see the conversation between Simon and Fionna at the campfire. And honestly, it's quite a bit different, so I wanted to talk about it right here. Simon is a lot more direct about what actually is upsetting Fionna. Instead of just saying, you did the right thing, we get right into the topic at hand. Cake would have been killed. And then Fionna, of course, is having a breakdown right here. That's what I thought, but what if she could have taken the crown? I blew her last chance because I didn't believe in her. A lot of baggage. A lot of baggage. Now, I love this scene right here. Fionna says that she didn't want to see Cake get hurt, and then that directly correlates back to Simon's dialogue about how he didn't want to see Marceline get hurt, so he took the crown. I think there's a really great correlation here that is kind of missed because they decided to cut this line. And there's other sequences like this later on, but we'll get to them when we get to them. There's a really great moment right here when Fionna asks if there was another way to save Marceline, and Simon does respond once again that he doesn't know, but he also adds that there's nothing else he could have done at the time. And I like this line a lot because it makes it feel as though that the through line of being able to choose your own path that's brought up in Casper and Nova and Cheers is sort of being alluded to here in my opinion. It's the fact that once you go down one specific mindset, one train of thought for too long, you're kind of stuck in that train of thought. I like that mentality a lot, and I feel as though adding this into the actual narrative of the episode added a lot. So I like that this is brought up earlier. Skipping forward a bit, we have the scene where Fionna and Simon start to have their little flashback sequence where he's at the lecture hall, and Fionna directly asks, even tilting her head as sort of in joke, that this is what the watchers want to know. She's like, how'd you meet somebody like that? It's very kind of meta, and I liked it a lot. And then obviously we get some more info, and Simon is actually a lot more descriptive, and this I think is another great moment that should have definitely been in the episode that shows how devoted he is to Betty. Obviously we still see him drawing her in the dirt, but we get this great dialogue. She was so brave and witty and insanely smart. The fact Simon's able to start rattling off these compliments about her just completely out of the blue shows how devoted he is to her. So I thought that this moment should have definitely been a part of it as well, because it goes to show, like I said, how devoted he is to her. And I feel as though the more that we see them pining for each other and in love with each other, the more we would have felt the tragedy of the situation at hand. And don't get me wrong, we've already felt this tragedy for a long time, but I feel as though getting this more just would have been like them feeding us. You know, we're finally getting this stuff like really in depth, and now they're just giving us not fan service, but like stuff that makes it feel as though this relationship is as real and as in depth as the writers had set up for years and years at this point. Simon's compliments continue to go further and further, and then Fionna obviously gets super invested because Fionna is a fiend for romance, which is obviously very great. And another meta-ish thing, Fionna obviously wants to know as much about Simon as we do because we're so invested in these characters. But the best part by far is the fact that after all those compliments, all those amazing moments, we finally see for the first time in the entire series, Simon calls Betty his princess. And oh my god, how was this not in the actual series? We needed this. This was such a satisfying full circle moment for the series as a whole. So having this eventually be part of season 2 is something I am absolutely rooting for. My fingers are crossed. You guys have no idea. This is like one of those things. We need this to happen. So I'm hoping we get these moments sooner rather than later. So cutting to Simon's lecture, we start to see a lot of little things that seem to add up in my opinion, and could be something they build on in season 2. So I want to establish a lot of these moments that we've already seen and show the little differences between the two. Obviously, Simon and Betty having their fun little storyline right here. We see that Betty is so enamored by Simon's absolute imagination, his positivity, his seemingly never-ending wellspring of sort of hope for trying to find something that's new and interesting and out of the box. And Betty can relate to that. We have an absolutely amazing moment right here where instead of him getting a composition book thrown right in his face, we have a joke about waiting for the movie instead of reading the book, obviously because the Enchiridion's a book. This moment afterwards where we get a sort of focus on Betty and Babette's reactions to all the people making the jokes at Simon outside of Babette laughing earlier, the one about the magic beanstalk, is really great because it shows how devoted she is to his entire idea of what he does for his research. So I thought that was really cool. And she's actively hating on the people around her, saying, "Can you believe these fools?" Babette immediately comes around saying, "Come on, he is kind of, you know, out there." And then Betty screams in joy. Yeah, That's what I like about him. That type of dialogue shows how passionate she is and how, you know, just interesting she is as a character. Her entire thing doesn't revolve around Simon, but she finds something in him that a lot of people don't seem to relate to. Then we get the scene of her talking to Simon after the lecture, and we have a lot to talk about here because this scene has so much to just deep dive, so we're gonna be here for a bit, just letting you guys know. So we get the scene of Simon and Betty talking about their experience in the library, meeting each other after going for the same book, and then Betty talks about how she wants Simon to sign her copy of his own work, which obviously happens in the original, but if we skip forward just a bit, we see that Betty actually liked it so much that she actually wrote a paper citing it, which was a really fun fan theory around the time, because obviously with Betty being in grad school, she knows the struggles of having a very niche interest, and having someone with that same niche interest literally lecturing at the exact university she goes to must have been like lightning in a bottle right there. So clearly she was trying to be confident. She was trying to actually talk to this guy that she's literally adored so much this entire time. And I think this is a really great moment because it shows just how much she idolizes him, not only with him literally being on a pedestal above her, with her having to look up to see him, but the fact that she literally has used his own words as a source of inspiration for her and her work. There's a clear difference in their status in the relationship and the power dynamic they have, and I think that this is really important to have in the scene. Now, obviously they had that power dynamic at the start with her already knowing of his work, but I think this adds another layer onto it. So Betty then has her entire speech talking about how she wanted to go to Australia in order to try and decipher these petroglyphs she wanted to find, but then she decides to obviously go with Simon. She sees it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so it makes a lot of sense that she's going to do this. But then this scene is really different from the original. So let me show you beat by beat. Simon is completely in disbelief from what Betty is saying. No one's ever talked to him like this before. He's used to people all around her, like the people who were making fun of his interests and making fun of the stuff that he's spent his whole life working towards. So he is stunned by this sort of absolute positivity towards the stuff he's interested in. And he literally can't believe it, to the extent where he asks her straight up, seriously? He cannot believe that this is actually happening. He can't believe he's finding someone not just interested in the work he's interested in, but devoted enough to just go with him after he asked her to go. He even said that sort of as a joke in a sense, but the fact Betty was so confident and straightforward is something he's not really expecting. Then Betty immediately comes through with another amazing line, "I really believe in your work," and obviously that's a great double layer of shipping pain and also just great awkwardness between the two, because we know that this is just too overly cute and wholesome and how terrible things are going to go, and this is the meet cute, you know. Obviously they met in the library, but we didn't need to see that. This is it. This is the foundation of their relationship. So having this be so almost campy in a sense with a line like this is adorable, and I love it so much. Really wish that this was in, especially with the scene beforehand of him asking if she's actually interested. She then says the petroglyphs aren't going anywhere, which is obviously foreshadowing to her constantly putting her own interest to the side in favor of Simon's interest, and then is once again determined to go with him, saying she'll promise this, she'll be helpful. And then this alt text, which is obviously in the thumbnail of the video, says Petrigrof over petroglyphs, and I just thought that was so crazy that they actually just put that in the storyboard notes that I had to include it. I just thought it was so funny. And then obviously we get a bit more cheese, which is so great because we see a very awkward smile start to build up between the two and how they don't know how to communicate whatsoever. Some creepy smiles. Then Babette comes in literally, "Hey Betty, there's cheese." I love how ham-fisted the writers have pushed to make this as adorable and as cheesy as possible, to the extent that they literally had Betty's friend just come in with cheese, which is just too cute. I really like this joke as well. The reason I really like that scene of Simon being so in disbelief that anyone is interested in the things he's interested in, because of what follows right here after Fiona hears this little bit of the story. She says the same line, "Wow, you just met and she dropped everything to go with you?" And normally Cake would scream right here and cut the part of the story. But then there's a line right here that Simon says that I really like. Yeah, she was so passionate about the work. It was like finding a kindred spirit. And I love this line because it shows that Simon not only is completely oblivious to the interest that she had in him from the start, but it shows that he didn't even see it as anything alluding to himself at all. We saw in that earlier scene that Simon did not even believe that anyone could be interested in him whatsoever. So him further alluding to it years later, many years later, that she was never interested in him at the start. It was always about the work and the passion they had towards this subject that they had the shared interest in, and not her being interested in him. There was a reason that she went to go with the Simon Petrigrof, not just anyone. So I'm really happy that this scene sort of cements how locked into that specific mindset Simon's been the entire time, because it shows just how oblivious he was to how much she cared about him, which obviously is one of the major themes of this entire series, where it shows that his obliviousness to the people around him and constantly being stuck in the state of depression evidently made himself feel that he is not as important as these other people, and belittling himself the entire time, until people like Fionna and Cake have made him realize that he does matter to other people. And not only that, he matters because he is himself. So I love that this scene was included so late in the series, and I wish that it was still in the episode, because it shows his oblivious nature really well, in my opinion. Especially when later on the same episode, Fionna is going to reiterate that when Betty is at the bus stop and she just asks Simon, "Oh, so you went on the bus with her?" That sort of moment I felt would have been a great parallel to him being very enthusiastic about it, to him not questioning it, but not being sure how to respond to Fiona's question. Once again, I would like to thank Jackie Files for not only being someone who's worked on the show and came up with all these great storyboards for these amazing scenes, but also being confident enough to just upload them to the internet for all of us to see. It was really appreciative and really cool looking at some of these scenes that I thought were amazing and seeing the preliminary stages of what they would have been. So, thank you so much, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know it might have been kind of different from my usual content, but it's something that I wanted to talk about, so I thought I might as well talk about it. This show obviously is going to be super great in season 2, so I wanted to talk about all the things that were in season 1 and all the stuff that could actually be in season 2, since technically this isn't in season 1. So hopefully you enjoyed, and let me know what you thought was the most interesting. As I said earlier, all the links will be down below, so hopefully you check them out as well. That's going to be it from me. Hope you have a good one, and take care.